Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us on this panel looking at accountability and transformative accountability. My name is Catherine Green. I am the Humanitarian Accountability Advisor for World Vision International. I'm just going to share my screen. So we have got three panelists with me today, and I'll introduce them in a little bit. And I would encourage you all to, as you have been with the opening speakers, to drop questions in the chat. I just wanted to start with a few comments, and I guess we can't really start a session on accountability without reflecting perhaps on maybe some of the comments that have been made recently by Mark Lowcock. And, you know, I think that accountability to affected populations is certainly not something new within the humanitarian sector, but it's certainly something that we, I think, still grapple with in getting right and getting, you know, making sure that we are doing the best that we can to be accountable to communities. We've seen last week that perhaps with some controversy, Mark Lowcock delivered a scathing assessment of the current state of accountability within the sector, and he unveiled at the Humanitarian Network and Partnership Week a pilot proposal for the Independent Commission for Voices in Crisis, or the ICVIC, it might be called. And it proposes that to establish an approach to pilot elevating and making more visible the priorities and needs identified by affected people to senior decision makers, and to independently evaluate how well the international humanitarian response delivers against those needs. There is some concerns circulating within the sector in response to this, that it's just another layer of bureaucracy that will be imposed upon an already quite heavy bureaucratic humanitarian system. And that we will not deliver on the aims of a humanitarian response that delivers what people want rather than what it can provide. And so while Lowcock may argue that one of the biggest failings of the system is that agencies do not pay enough attention to the voices of people caught up in crisis, I think we shouldn't forget that, yes, as a sector, we need to be more accountable to the populations that we are working with. And as Danny mentioned in his opening remarks, it's really time to take accountability seriously. And there are many gaps. But I think what I hope to achieve with this panel today is to look at some of the really hard work that is happening every day by people who work in really difficult contexts, to make sure that accountability is happening in a really authentic way. So while discussion rages about whether the humanitarian system as a whole needs an independent commission for voices in crisis, I'd like to introduce these three panelists who work every day to transform the way that they are accountable to the communities that they work with, and to make sure that World Vision as a whole is more and more accountable to the communities that we work with. So I am pretty in awe of the three panelists that are joining us today. We have Nurhan Al-Fayoumi, the Accountability and Learning Coordinator for the World Vision Syria response. We have Paul Chigwe, he's the MEAL, Monitoring, Evaluation, Accountability and Learning Manager for World Vision in the Uganda refugee response. And we have Martin Amoro, the Program Quality and Strategy Manager for World Vision South Sudan. Martin, I want to start with you and maybe pick up on something quite topical, and that is, how have you been working to adapt and implement accountability as a result of the changing context with COVID?
Well, thanks, Catherine, and thank you to everybody who has joined. So in March 2020 after the global shutdown, you remember, as a result of the pandemic, with governments locking up all the space and changing SOPs coming up, COVID-19 SOPs, lockdowns were being instituted, but the needs of the people did not change, but rather needs increased. So we were faced with the threat of a total closeout, which meant no opportunity to listen to the communities, and this was not an option, but rather the situation compelled us to rethink and restructure the way programming consults, shares information, engages with our participants as ways in order to continue listening to the communities. So usually as a practice, after an assessment, you set up your mechanisms or your ways in which you want to engage with the communities built on consensus building. But with the lockdowns and SOPs, we had to start by striking a balance between what would work in the context currently, which meant doing a review on our routine static options that we had set up. Most of them were help desks, project management committees, group meetings, and these are usually conducted on specific days in specific places and frequencies that are predetermined all throughout, of course, in consultation with the project participants. So we had to change this and think of remote options, relying more on community representatives and, of course, leveraging on mobile phones to support. We were quick to integrate the SOPs that were also changing into accountability. And with the dynamics that we were facing, the challenges, we shifted our reliance now onto hotlines, for example, as opposed to face engagements. And this also had other implications. Our approaches had to change from the kind of converging approach that we did use. So this means that people were used to meeting in certain places and discussing, but now we had to adopt a tracer approach, which would mean we had to reach out to the communities we work with, we had to trace them to their households, but also add different random approaches of phone calls to collect feedback. Of course, initially with the lockdown, we first stopped the huge group engagements, but we had to change that along the way as the SOPs continued to get more and more clear. We had to adapt the way we have conversations and opting for more one-on-one key informants. So it was a big shift from the group conversations that we were used to going into the key informant interviews. And by the way, we only resumed the focus group discussions after we had fully integrated the SOPs. There was more guidance that was out there and started conducting few, but in ways that we considered it safe for everybody. So with the changing SOPs and guidelines, we had to quickly adopt a hybrid approach. But key here was flexibility, okay, to align our accountability mechanisms to every decision that government was making. And this usually worked for the different groups that we're engaging with. For example, the door-to-door home visits to engage with children who were attending remote learning. When government announced that schools were closed, we had no option, but also to find a way of how we'll continue engaging with the children. We had to conduct some phone calls with teachers, for example, who were part of the programs that we're doing, but also engage the different school management committees remotely as ways of collecting feedback. When it came to decision-making, again, some of it was relying on the key informant interviews, doing consultative with few people, but also relying on some of these phone conversations we're having. So to continue listening in certain areas, we had to create multiple layers of our systems that we had set up, because as the SOPs came out, it meant that we had to review our people, restructure our groups, reorganize the way we've set this up and create duplicate layers based on the way activities had been recognized. And I'll talk about distributions, for example, in our nutrition sites, where we had to shift the schedule or the cycle of distribution from 2 weekly to monthly to avoid frequent gathering of people, but maintain the systems working, the help desk, but also rely more on phone calls and sample mothers, reaching out to them to hear their views on how programming was going. So generally, we know that the pandemic has changed the way we receive, comprehend, and react to feedback from our communities to more of an inquiry approach where you have to inquire, comprehend, and proact. And of course, this has come with some limitations. In the past, we've enjoyed the benefits of interaction with quick consensus building in group meetings and planning with communities. With that said, this pandemic has shown us that accountability needs to be flexible and with changes from the traditional converging approaches to more outreach approaches, but also a shift on reliance on people-centered accountability. In the past, of course, we set up our systems and leave them to work. People seeking information or engaging with the systems, but these are now driven by people. And I'm also quick to flag out the power of technology for communication, because this has been key in helping us be able to reach out to the different participants. So lastly, I'd like to remind us that not listening to project participants is not an option, but continuously adapting is. And reflections through different surveys show us that on average, when we're collecting feedback from the different participants on our programming, our satisfaction levels were at about 75% with programming. So Catherine, back to you.
Great, thank you so much, Martin. The next question that I have is for Nurhan. Something that I think can be synonymous with accountability is the feedback box. But I think we all know that it's not enough to just set up a feedback box in order to tick the box of accountability, so to speak. So can you talk about maybe some of the measures that we need to take in order to be truly accountable to communities?
For sure. Thank you so much, Catherine, for this question. I believe this question is one of the most important questions to ensure that accountability system and approaches we are applying to communities are effective and can leverage the learning, in order to enhance the quality of our interventions, so it could meet the standards and the needs of the communities that we are working with. To do so, there are several measures that could be considered throughout the project management cycle in order to be truly accountable towards our communities. As a first step, a contextualized guidelines or SOPs should be in place to ensure that all of the relevant staff have a clear reference while participating in accountability. Then, at the organizational level, we need to ensure that we have a clear understanding of accountability, its standards, and ensure that all staff have the responsibility, the shared responsibility towards accountability. These measures are significant in order to integrate accountability practices into the project management cycle, starting from the design phase till the end of it. After that, when it comes into developing the accountability system itself, for our targeted beneficiaries, we need to ensure that the mechanisms provided to our communities are appropriate and accessible to everyone, especially the marginalized groups, as we need to consult the community on the systems we are planning to initiate based on their preferences. Using this bottom-up approach is critical for this step because it allows the organization to listen to all of the groups in the communities that we are targeting, and it will lead the organization to find the most suitable mechanisms that can be put in place for the community so they can really trust and they can really access those mechanisms. This will also help in avoiding using one-size-fits-all approach. As an example, during COVID-19, we've conducted a rapid assessment for one of our GOSH projects located in Northwest Syria. Through consulting with different segments of the community, including elderly, people with disabilities, and female head of households, the assessment was basically focusing on gathering the views and perceptions of beneficiaries' needs on how they would like to be involved in our projects, in the decision-making and the implementation of it, and how they would feel comfortable providing feedback and complaints as well, where we established and provide a variety of methodologies based on this assessment to share the needed information. The results from this assessment indicated that the most favored method reported by people with disabilities for sharing information was receiving voice messages through WhatsApp, And this indeed was an interesting finding that feeds into being creative and innovative in our approaches. Then we can move to activation of those different mechanisms based on the preferences that we've got and the findings that we've got from consulting with the targeted communities. And here it's really important to ensure a variety of methods are in place to reach all of the groups in the community without leaving anyone behind. So we cannot just, for example, get the preferences of the males or the female head of household and neglect the other sections that we have in our communities. We need to fully understand what type of groups do we have in our communities in order to provide the right and suitable methods for everyone so they can access it and use it. After that, like since we have a running system, we need to monitor and evaluate regularly the effectiveness of this system through a satisfaction survey and take the necessary adaptive measures. For example, here at World Vision Syria Response, we started doing a quarterly satisfaction survey across the areas of implementation just to ensure that the available mechanisms are suitable and are still suitable, let us say, for all of the targeted beneficiaries that we have or communities there, and to check the level of satisfaction on those mechanisms that we have in place. And one final point. Okay, okay. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks, Nurhan. I want to move to you now, Paul, because one of the things that we've heard a lot from the other panelists is around flexibility, which is really important. But I'm interested to hear from you, how do we manage to ensure that we have a standardized and consistent approach to accountability while still being adaptive in fragile contexts, like in the Uganda refugee response where you work?
Thank you very much, Catherine, for that question. Firstly, allow me to briefly define the two approaches. Adaptive accountability refers to the approach where we recognize the changing needs, the environment in our context, especially the humanitarian context that are changing all the time. And this therefore calls for flexibility in systems, in processes and tactics. Meanwhile, standardized accountability refers to the approach where we have a blueprint that guides the systems from the start through implementation up to the end. I'll give an example. For the case of World Vision, we have the program accountability framework. And then we work also with the core humanitarian standards. Those are blueprints. However, I would like to say that from experience and from what we are doing at World Vision, the Uganda refugee response, we are working with the two approaches in such a way that the blueprint, the program accountability framework, guides us from the onset. However, as we continue implementing accountability, we keep monitoring the system to see what is changing and how can we address the change. And I'd like to give an example of the assessment, the accountability needs assessment that we conducted 2 years ago. And the result in one of the communities showed that less than 30% of the community members didn't have phones. And in that case, it meant that we didn't, the idea of using toll-free line as one of the key feedback mechanisms was not appropriate and would not be effective. So we decided against it and opted for other feedback mechanisms. However, after 1.5 years, we decided to conduct a rapid needs assessment, in that particular community, and the results showed that over 70% of the respondents had phones, compared to 28 in the earlier assessment. Therefore, it meant that we needed to revise, and indeed, we made a toll-free line as one of the key elements, key feedback mechanisms. We had the discussion with the communities and they bought the idea. So that's how we are implementing the tool to achieve flexibility in our accountability system. Thank you so much, Catherine. Over to you.
Thanks, Paul. I think that's a really great example that shows it's not enough to just set and forget a feedback mechanism, because people's needs change in how they want to receive information and how they prefer to give feedback. Norhad, I want to turn to you now. We've spoken a lot about the feedback mechanisms and how we hear the voices of people. Mark Lowcock, in his recent comments, was talking about one of the failures was from the sector more broadly, was about not actually listening and acting on the feedback. So, I mean, you all work in really challenging contexts where at times there can be pressure just to get the job done. And accountability and listening to communities and adapting our programs based on community voices can be seen as some extra work besides being just actually our job. Can you talk about a time when accountability systems and the feedback that you have heard from communities has led to some significant changes in the way that you're working?
Thank you, Catherine. Sure, I can give actually 2 examples where communities' feedback led to a transformative change on several levels. So basically, for example, one of our projects in Northwest Syria, targeting women and children by providing vocational trainings to the most vulnerable women there, and recreational activities for the children. So basically, during the implementation of previous phases of this project, we kept receiving suggestions through our feedback and complaints mechanisms on adding requests to add like new courses on sewing. As a result of that, during the project design of the next phase, we've added this component, and we made sure like to be included as a separate course or vocational training where women can use. In addition to that, there is a second example on the same project. Also during previous phases, we've conducted some sort of a customized children consultation sessions in order to strengthen our accountability systems for the children. So based on the findings from those consultation sessions, we saw that there was a very good proportion of children like requesting to be part of this selection process of their facilitators for their recreational activities, as they were looking for a certain like characteristics in the facilitator. So based on that, based on like these findings, we shared it with the project manager, and the action taken was to include the characteristics required from the children in the selection criteria we have for the facilitators during the interviews that we were doing to pick the right facilitator. So I guess this was like a good example for me on how we can hear even children, like the small voices that we have, to do a transformative change in our projects in order to meet their needs. So yeah, over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Norhan. And I think that's a great example because, you know, listening to community voices and preferences isn't just about changing program implementation. I think your example about children having a preference for the type of person employed to work with them is a really good example of how we need to be really listening to more than just what are people's basic needs. It's about recognizing more fully what people actually want from the organisations like World Vision. Paul, I want to move to you now because I think Nurhan brought up something that we try and work really hard on in World Vision, given that we are a child-focused organisation. And oftentimes people talk about, oh, we need to know the preferences of the community in terms of how to give feedback. But as we know, the community is not a homogenous group. There are lots of different people and preferences within a community, just as in this small panel, there's a lot of different preferences in how we like to receive information and give feedback. So can you talk a little bit more, picking up from what Nurhan talked about, in terms of what can we do to make sure that specific groups within a community, and specifically children, have access to safe and responsive accountability mechanisms, and that we're actually responding to what communities, children in communities are telling us?
Thank you very much, Catherine, for the question. I want to say that most organizations, humanitarian actors, know, including World Vision that I work for, we know the key feedback mechanisms. We know them very well, those that are effective and those that do not deliver well, that which we need to do. However, there is one big mistake that I want to share here, and that is humanitarian actors sitting in their offices and deciding on which mechanism to use. Where do we place this suggestion box? When can we deliver the logbooks? And in the process, it's not delivering. Reason being that we are not taking care of the preferences of the communities we serve. And for us at World Vision, we have identified this gap, and we are doing mainly two things. One, ensuring that we conduct accountability needs assessments to have an insight of what is happening in the communities, what are their preferences in terms of feedback mechanisms, what resources are within that particular community. I'll give an example, for instance. The community may prefer a suggestion box, but as the people, the leaders in this particular area, we can provide some guidance. For instance, if the community is suggesting a suggestion box and the findings from the assessment show that majority of the community members cannot write, that means that this may not be very effective, and therefore it's our duty to explain to them, much as we are very considerate of what they prefer, what are the preferences. Then we continue to monitor the system as it works, especially the feedback mechanism, what is working, what are the community members saying, and go ahead to incorporate the feedback where need be. I've just talked about the flexibility, the adaptive approach. So that's where it comes in, to continue monitoring and getting evidence for change, to advocate for that change or to guide. So those are the two things we are doing: to monitor and to do assessments. I'll give an example of a very good outcome from this approach. Sometime in 2019, we conducted a rapid assessment among the children in one of our programs, that is MICA program. And the feedback the children gave, one of the key feedback was that, one, they felt that their views were not being considered, and therefore they requested that they be given an opportunity whenever the assessments, consultation is to have their own meeting in such a way that they can freely hear their views. Indeed, we have taken it up. We make sure if it's an assessment, a consultation, we have separate focus groups for children, separate meetings for the children. And the other thing that they gave was that they felt they didn't have a safe place to play and relax. And it's something we shared with management and the program team. And as I talk now, quite a number of safe places for children have been set up in different locations within our scope in the Uganda refugee response. Thank you very much, Catherine. That's what we are doing, and back to you.
Great, thanks so much, Paul.
Yep.
A number of people in their opening remarks, including Danny, talked about the increasing need and desire to work through partnerships. And that's something, Norhan, that you're already doing a lot of in the Syria response. So with this increase of the humanitarian system in general working through partnerships, how have you collaborated with partners in Northwest Syria and the Syria response more broadly to establish coordinated accountability systems and not just being a lone wolf as World Vision having accountability systems set up?
Yes, for sure. So to begin with, I would like to give a short brief about World Vision, the work that we do, and our work in accountability in specific. For World Vision, Syria Response has been operating in Syria, Turkey, and Jordan since 2011, where we provide life-saving protection, education, wash, and livelihoods, in addition to health services to refugees and local communities. So basically, as you know, globally in World Vision, we use a framework called Program Accountability Framework. The framework consists with 4 pillars, which entail information provision, community consultation, participation, and collecting and acting on feedback and complaints. So based on this framework, and to ensure our approach is holistic, for the Syria response operation, I developed 2 SOPs. The first one was an internal SOPs laying down the accountability processes for World Vision staff internally, and the second one was on implementing the accountability through our local partners in the field. So basically for this SOPs, the guidelines in the accountability through partners SOPs outline a clear process that will support in identifying the strengths, areas of improvement, and capacities of our national partners in order to support them. So in order to do that, we usually do a comprehensive accountability capacity assessment to our partners as a first step. Then a coordination meeting will be held with the partner to discuss the findings from this assessment and agree on the action points and the roles on how it will be split between both of us in order to have a complementary and coordinated system. In addition to that, like based on our discussion during those coordination meetings, we develop an action plan that will include, for example, the assigned roles as I've mentioned, the capacity building needs that we need to provide to our implementing partners to support them on their accountability systems, and accountability tools and templates that we can equip our implementing partners with to ensure that the system is strengthened and harmonized with World Vision procedures. This is not only important for the current World Vision programs, but also to empower our partners and to build their capacities in addition to promoting ownership towards accountability. And actually here I wanted to talk a little bit more about how we usually support and activate the feedback and complaints handling mechanisms with the coordination of our implementing partners. As I mentioned earlier, World Vision Syria response, we usually build the capacities of our partners in order for them to run their own systems in a proper way that meets the needs of the targeted beneficiaries, and to ensure that we are really providing mechanisms that allow us to hear what the beneficiaries needs and their voices in general. So basically, we and the implementing partner, what exactly we do, we have both systems running. However, we ensure that each feedback and complaint system is a complementary for the other system, where we can provide a variety of channels to our beneficiaries in order to ensure the accessibility of those channels. So this is basically what we're doing. And based on that, to be honest, I wanted to give an example on how good partnering can lead to a really effective, we can say, feedback and complaints mechanisms in the field itself. So for example, in one of our WASH projects located on Northwest Syria as well, we used to, we kept receiving recurring complaints related to the chlorine taste of the provided water and the insufficient amount of provided water. However, for the insufficient amount of provided water, we used to provide the amount based on the sphere standards, but still we kept receiving those recurring complaints, us and our implementing partner. So based on that, we started, as you were doing the action needed through doing tests for the water provided just to check the levels of the chlorine, in addition to raising the awareness of our communities with the amount provided of water. However, we kept receiving those complaints. So our implementing, in the coordination of our implementing partner, we've invited the committee members of the local community that we were serving in. We've invited them to join us on a WhatsApp group where we can share those complaints and show them that we are doing the needed job just to check the quality of the provided services and to show them that it's only related to the perceptions of the communities and not the quality of the service that we are providing. And based on that, we were able to let those committees help us in raising the awareness of the targeted communities within those two complaints, as the chlorine, from what we saw, that the chlorine rate was on the right levels. However, the perceptions of the community, they felt, since they are tasting the chlorine or something like this, they felt like there was some kind of wrong with the levels of chlorine provided in the water. So those committee members really supported us on raising the awareness towards our community in order to reduce the number of complaints received regarding those two issues. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thanks so much, Norhan. And that's a really great example that shows the complexity sometimes of responding to community feedback. Sometimes it isn't as simple as hearing community feedback that people need X and then providing X. Sometimes the community feedback is about needing more information. It's about perception. It's about needing advocacy, perhaps. So I think that's a really good example that shows the complexity of responding to community feedback in some cases. We have just over 10 minutes left of the panel, and so I want to get to some of our closing remarks from our panel's members, so we might have a bit of time for questions. We've heard in the last week some of the vision or future looking ideas from people like Mark Lowcock and what they think the future of accountability might look like. But I want to ask all of our panelists who work every day in their different contexts, what do you think the future of accountability to affected people looks like? What do we need to start doing and what do we need to stop doing? So I'll start with you, Martin. What do you think is the future of accountability to affected populations?
Well, thanks, Catherine, and that's an interesting question. So the COVID times have actually presented us an opportunity to present, to change the way we approach accountability, and really I'm optimistic while predicting the future of accountability. I'm quick to flag out key areas that I think we need to have deep conversations around, and one is on increasing the involvement of communities at macro level or policy level in terms of how do we allocate resources through representation and inclusive participation in some of these decision-making processes. I also predict innovation and technology as key drivers. Of course, looking at interactive accountability platforms, leveraging, for example, voice, mass messaging, government platforms. As you know, right now, different partners are running different platforms, different technologies, but consolidation, for example, from centralized platforms is the key to accountability. And in terms of innovation, I would call for partnerships and conversations between the private sector and the humanitarian architecture, basically on available, cheap and ready to use, technology and platforms, and leveraging on some of the existing platforms that they have. And I'll give an example in emergencies. How do we engage with communication companies, for example, to reach out to people in need through behavior change messages or banking and cash programming, just few ideas. Then in terms of how we respond, being quick, because that's key in how we meet the needs of the people. How do we leverage on technology, for example, to provide 24-hour access feedback, for example, through using real-time support service dashboards like we have is automated in banking systems, in the telecommunication, helplines, but also having real-time platforms for providing information on time to all stakeholders, accessible to all. I also believe in some kind of joint and humanitarian or cluster approach when it comes to collection of results, harmonization of reporting requirements, analysis, and also a more systematic way of how we consolidate, interpret, and make use of this information. And this also drives me to my next point about advocacy, because this ties to information. How do we use feedback for advocacy? And I see, for example, a future where the humanitarian advocacy will be majorly informed by feedback that is coming to the project participants, and this will drive decision-making around allocation of resources and priorities. Partners, again, are key because different partners have different strengths. And if I'm to talk about an accountability value chain here, the way we have it in other sectors, I think it would be good for partners to leverage resources and strength to be able to provide different solutions or needs for the different communities based on their key strength. Under coordination and sustainability, I think I'd recommend a systematic approach for accountability in public services. And I want to borrow an example from health programming, where you have client exit surveys and palliative care surveys that are done systematically in whole supported facilities. This can be replicated across the different sectors that we work across. And lastly, but not least, is around evidence and learning based on different successes registered. I mean, this can be generated using evaluations, standardized evaluations, through which we listen to communities and make decisions. But also we need good meta-analysis at that kind of macro level to make decisions. Now it's good information scattered over all the partners. South Sudan, over 100 partners doing different things and collecting different evidence. What we need to stop, basically, again, I'll talk about it, is not listening to communities. We don't have that option. We also need to stop working independently, and it's time to come together to reflect and learn together. Back to you, Catherine.
Thanks so much, Martin. I want to throw to you now, Paul, if you would like to add any closing remarks in terms of what is the future of accountability, what do we need to start doing and what do we need to stop doing?
Thank you, Catherine. As a person who is so passionate about accountability, I must say with a lot of excitement that the future of accountability is very bright and grounded. This is informed by mainly two observations I've made over time. Firstly, we see accountability becoming more and more integral in program management and program quality. Initially, for instance, it used to be for a specific program project within the response, for instance, general food assistance. But as we move, you see that every project, for instance, in the Uganda refugee response, every project, accountability is just a key element and cannot be like looked at it as an addition, but it's a core element of each and every project within the response. Then secondly, from our networks and even within World Vision, we see that accountability is being implemented in the development programming. And that gives us a lot of hope that where we are moving is real good and very bright. And then regarding that which we need to do and that which we need to stop doing is firstly, I would like to see us putting the communities at the center of implementing and managing accountability. For instance, when we go to the field, you see that we are conducting a reflection meeting and we are sitting in the chairs, the communities are there listening. I think that must stop and let them take charge of these processes. Let the council take lead, chair a reflection meeting. That's what I want to see. Then secondly, I would like to see us doing more of integrating and coordinating our work as humanitarian actors, especially around referral and resolution. For instance, in the Uganda refugee response, that's at the national level, we have the feedback response and referral mechanism that is led by UNHCR. It's helping us to coordinate our accountability efforts. And I think it's a good thing. And therefore, we need to move away from the individual approach and work together. And thirdly, and the last one in the interest of time, is having everyone within our organization be part of accountability instead of leaving it for the mill team and others like it's none of their business. Let everyone come on board. And lastly, let's be deliberate when it comes to accountability. Let's be deliberate. Thank you so much, Catherine. I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Paul. And Norhan, I'll give you the final say. What's your vision for the future of accountability to affected populations? What do we need to start doing and what do we need to finish doing?
Actually, I want to provide a long answer as I totally agree with both of my colleagues, both and Martin. As I see a very promising future for accountability, especially nowadays where organizations are becoming more aware of the vital role of accountability, its practices and its importance. We need to continue consulting with our beneficiaries and collect feedback and hear their voices in order to be truly accountable to people. So we need to stop using the top-down approach and start with the bottom-up approach. Thank you so much. Over to you, Catherine.
Great. Thank you so much, Norhan, Paul, and Martin, for all of your comments today and for your closing remarks. We have about 3 minutes left, which is not a lot for questions. I just wanted to read out one comment here from Farida. She said that feedback mechanisms couldn't equate accountability. Feedback mechanisms is just one way to ensure humanitarians are accountable and that affected populations, including broader public, are listened to and that their ideas are taken into consideration by the service provider. And I completely agree, Farida. I think there is a lot of focus on, effective community feedback mechanisms, but actually accountability, as I'm sure Norhan, Paul, and Martin would agree, is much more than just a feedback box or insert other community feedback mechanism. It's about truly listening to communities, but it's also about participation and giving information, but also approaching accountability from a rights-based perspective, and to really address some of those inequities in power that exist within the humanitarian sector when you have a big orange organisation like World Vision in a community. So, you are 100% right that it is much more than just community feedback mechanisms. There is another question here. Should accountability be part of M&E and not considered as separate and unrelated matter in the implementation of a program? So that's a question from Luca. Anyone in the panel want to answer that one quickly? We have 1 minute left.
Catherine, yes, I'd like to take that one up. I'm of the view that we should be part of M&E because they go hand in hand. The work is kind of related, so we can maintain it together. Yep, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And maybe if we have time for one more quick question, this is from Farida to Norhan. To what extent is the reach of your feedback mechanism? Does your feedback mechanism exist within your service areas? How do you manage recurring complaints and inquiries from non-beneficiaries?
Catherine, I'm really sorry. Could you come again? I couldn't hear the question that well. I'm really sorry for that.
The question was, to what extent is the reach of your feedback mechanism? Does feedback mechanism only exist in your service area? And how do you manage recurring complaints or inquiries from non-beneficiaries?
Okay, so basically for the recurring complaints, when we're talking even of like non-beneficiaries, we usually share those complaints with the technical department that we have in our offices. We do this on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, where we share such recurrent complaints in order to take a decision and include it in our future interventions in case we have some, or share it with other clusters that they can support the non-beneficiary to get their needs like through different interventions that we do not like usually provide. So this is what we usually do, and usually we share it, as I mentioned, with the TAs and the management, even those recurrent complaints, in order to ensure that we are truly listening to our targeted communities, even if they were not beneficiaries under our projects. Thank you.
Great, thanks Norhan. I think we're going to have to stop there. I would like to thank all of my panelists today, Norhan, Paul and Martin, for the work that they do each and every day to be accountable to the communities that they work alongside. And I would like to thank all of the people who came today and listened to this panel, asked questions, made comments, and engaged in the ongoing conversation about how we can be more accountable to the communities that we work with. So thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the conference.